PM Narendra Modi is set to embark on his first state visit to the United States. It's being described as a historic moment in the India-U.S. relationship. PM Modi will be the third Indian leader to be accorded the honor of a state visit and only the first Indian Prime Minister to address a joint session of the U.S. Congress twice. He last delivered such an address in 2016. The Prime Minister's packed schedule between the 21st and 23rd of June will include bilateral talks with President Biden, a state dinner at the White House, a private event to be hosted at the White House for him by President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden, a tech event where President Biden will accompany the Prime Minister, a luncheon hosted by Vice President Kamala Harris and Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and interactions with American CEOs and business leaders, as well as a much-anticipated address to the Indian diaspora. There is so much excitement over this visit that over 7,000 Indian Americans are expected to be present on the south lawns of the White House when President Biden and the First Lady welcome Prime Minister Modi, complete with a 21-gun salute. During this visit, the two sides are expected to ink a $3 billion deal for 31 Predator drones manufactured by an American company. India-U.S. ties will now extend to defense technology cooperation. A breakthrough on the joint manufacture of fighter jet engines and transfer of sensitive technology in this arena are on the cards. In addition to this, there's likely to be collaboration between India and the United States in the areas of semiconductors, trade, space cooperation, knowledge partnership, research and education, civil nuclear cooperation, telecom and artificial intelligence. Visa delays for Indian students and visitors are also expected to come up in these talks. While the focus will be on bilateral issues, pressing global issues such as the Ukraine war and its economic impact on the global south, and most significantly, shared anxiety about China, its growing belligerence and its role in the Indo-Pacific will also figure prominently in these talks. On the show today, we're asking just what does the state visit mean for the India-U.S. relationship, and can it emerge as the defining relationship of the 21st century? So it's being described as a historic visit. You wrote a comprehensive article recently outlining various milestones in the India-U.S. relationship over the decades and what it means today. So let me ask you this. If President Bill Clinton's visit to India all the way back in 2000 marked a new era in this bilateral relationship, and the civil nuclear deal inked under President Bush and Prime Minister Manmohan Singh took it to a new level, how would you describe the importance of Prime Minister Modi's visit to the U.S. in 2023? Some say it's the coming of age of this relationship. Would you agree?
So Neha, as you mentioned, in many ways, the present state of the relationship was initiated through President Clinton's visit to India in 2000. And after that, through the path-breaking Civil Nuclear Cooperation Agreement in 2008, President Bush took the relationship to another level, opening up technology releases for India and partnerships in higher levels of technology. And then you had President Obama, who visited India twice in his tenure, and no US president had done that. And he also invited Prime Minister Manmohan Singh as the first state visitor of the Obama administration, declared support for India's permanent membership of UN Security Council, declared India a major defense partner. And then you recall that President Trump put India on strategic trade authorization level 1. That means technology releases on the same level as NATO partners of the United States. And he joined the Indian Prime Minister for a rally of 50,000 Indian Americans in Houston. And very unusual for a US president to join an event meant for a visiting foreign leader. So step by step, through various presidents, through Republican, Democratic presidents, through prime ministers from different parties in India, the relationship has consolidated. So I think given that, this visit certainly does mark another milestone, because you'd have noticed that in May 2022, the Indian Prime Minister and US President declared a new initiative for a partnership in critical and emerging technologies. Yeah. After that, the national security advisors of the two countries met in US in January this year and declared that in artificial intelligence, quantum, cyber, 6G, biotech, commercialization space, semiconductors, they will start a new partnership. And this partnership, the ISET, or Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technologies, has become the new organizing framework for the bilateral relationship in economics, technology, and defense. So given that, and given the fact that as the US ambassador mentioned, this is only the third state visitor of the Biden administration and also the third Indian leader ever. President Radhakrishnan went on a state visit in 1963. After a huge gap, it was Prime Minister Manmohan Singh in 2009 and Prime Minister Modi. So put it all together, certainly it is a milestone in the relationship. And given the fact that at least in terms of reports in the public domain coming out in the media, there are possibilities of agreements for cooperation in technology releases, for example, for jet engine technologies or in terms of semiconductors. So if that happens, it will be a signal that US is ready for a different kind of partnership with India.
Well, we certainly are hoping this would materialize during Prime Minister Modi's visit. So at the start of the show, I talked about the defense deals that are expected to be signed. We've talked about the Predator drone deal and the fighter jet engine deal and the myriad areas where we are likely to see progress. What, according to you, will be the biggest areas of convergence between the two sides during Prime Minister Modi's visit?
I think aside from, they need not necessarily be finalized deals because that takes a process. But if there are clear announcements of intent to proceed, for example, with jet engine technology transfer or make further progress related to the drones or in the area of semiconductors, that is an indication that something positive, something new has happened. So I think they will certainly look at consolidating relationship in different areas of technology. And you referred to potentially a tech event where the Prime Minister would be present and perhaps even the US President. If that works out, at that level, a signal that, so far, for example, the US has been putting some restrictions on technology partnerships with China. Now, at the same time, if the US is signaling that at high levels and in terms of their national security perspective, they want to encourage cooperation between businesses, between academia, on both sides, in high levels of technology. So that's a different kind of signal, because the business and academic community would also like to be assured that if they go down this path of cooperation with the US, later the two governments would not be saying that, no, you need to slow down on this. We have some national security concerns, that they are behind this. And I think that's the message that has gone out, that the governments support it. Now, beyond that, they will certainly look at the global situation. And one area that provides some convergence in terms of challenges and concerns is the Indo-Pacific and the challenge from China. The increasingly unilateral and assertive positions that China has taken in East China Sea, South China Sea, along the LAC with India. So the US feels, and it has said repeatedly, that although they see Russia as a major challenge in Europe, they see China as their primary economic, technological, and military challenge in a long-term perspective. They see China as the only country in the world today with the intent and the capability to replace the US in the global system. So they are making efforts to deal with this challenge, and as they say, to shape the environment around the rise of China so that the US interests are protected. Now, if US is looking at a technology competition with China, with a population of 1.4 billion people, they believe and they have assessed that a partnership with India will be very important for them. Again, India, country of 1.4 billion people with very strong human capital in technology. If you look at major US companies, Microsoft, Google, IBM, Adobe, the CEOs are persons of Indian origin. And many leading US companies in jet engines, in semiconductors, are getting cutting-edge R&D and technology work done in India, employing 4,000 people, 5,000 people. And of course, the IP is with the US companies. So they know the strength of India in terms of technology. In fact, when I was ambassador, I visited Silicon Valley several times. And I could see that Indian origin tech entrepreneurs, Indian origin tech workers were an integral part of US global leadership in innovation, including in digital technologies. So I think they are ready for a higher level of technology cooperation with India for their own interests. So I think that would be some of the convergence that the two leaders would be looking at.
In fact, there are some in the US administration who say never before has the US shared such sensitive technology with a non-ally as they're about to do in case of India. But sir, I'm glad you brought up China. I want to dwell a little further on the China dimension. There is undoubtedly shared anxiety between India and the United States over China's growing belligerence and expansionism, and as you said, its role in the Indo-Pacific. How are the two countries likely to address this particular issue during Prime Minister Modi's visit? Do you believe the US sees India as a counterbalance to China in Asia? Of course, interestingly, Secretary of State Antony Blinken visited Beijing over the weekend and even met with President Xi Jinping.
So there are different dimensions playing out. You know, at one level, the US has said, as I mentioned, that they see China as the main challenge. They see China as the pacing challenge. And they're organizing themselves regionally with the kind of partnerships they're building, Quad, talking of the Indo-Pacific, the AUKUS partnership, and also talking to the European partners to come together on a common approach in dealing with the Chinese challenge. But not only in terms of the international posture, even domestically, they're trying to strengthen themselves to manage the competition with China. So they have used the China challenge to push through legislation in Congress, the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, the Infrastructure Act, so that it is because of the perception related to China challenge that Republicans and Democrats in Congress, who are otherwise sharply divided, have come together to pass legislation to strengthen the US competitiveness and the US economy. So that's a certain approach that they're taking. Now, again, historically, when I have analyzed the US-India relationship, I have found that broadly 4 factors have impacted on this relationship at any point of time. And one of those factors is, what is US global priority at a point of time? And how does that global priority impact on India? And today, the US global priority is to deal with the challenge from China. Now, as they are dealing with the challenge from China, from their perspective, they would certainly not want, as they are dealing with the competition, for it to lead to conflict. So for that, they believe that some communication channels must be kept open with China and their allies and partners, including in Europe, including in ASEAN, would be more comfortable if US had some lines of communication open with China, and then they would be more willing to coordinate their policies with the US, because even the Europeans today say that, okay, not decoupling, but we are ready for de-risking as far as China is concerned, and therefore in terms of our investments and in terms of economic cooperation strategies, look for China plus options. So I think that's the reason why they want to maintain a level of communication with China, but they do feel that this is a competition that is here to stay. And they believe that in this competition, a partnership with India will be important for them. And you've seen US leaders say repeatedly that they see the rise of India to be in US interest. They see India as a net security provider in the region. And so that's the basis on which they are prepared to build a new relationship.
In fact, many are also linking the imminent defense deals to China. So we've talked about the areas of convergence. What, according to you, are the major areas of divergence that we are likely to see during these talks? Some of the thorny issues in the bilateral India-US relationship. Is the Ukraine-Russia war and India's stand on it, including India's oil imports from Russia, one of them?
So, there will always be areas of divergence. And in fact, in the article that you referred to, I did say that as the two countries consolidate the relationship, they must allow space for differences of opinion and assessments. Because we are located differently geographically, we have different historical experiences. So there will be different assessments. Now, for example, on the Russia-Ukraine issue, we have not agreed with the US position. And that's because we have a legacy relationship with Russia. Almost 60% of our defense inventory is still of Russian origin. Russia has supported India politically at a time when we were under pressure from the West, including the United States. And that's something that we need to certainly factor in. So, but I think the United States has handled that well They have, for example, the U.S. Secretary of State has said that we understand that India's relationship with Russia developed at a time when the U.S. was not willing to be that kind of a partner, but that US is now willing to be that kind of a partner, and therefore they are ready to do more with India. Or the National Security Advisor has said that with India, we are playing the long game today. So I think they have understood India's compulsions, and therefore they are handling it well. You referred to, for example, the energy imports from Russia, and initially there was some criticism. But then they took the position that energy availability has to be there in the market for prices to be stabilized and not to go through the roof. And earlier, India was buying a lot from the Gulf. But when the Europeans started picking up oil from the Gulf, when they stopped buying from Russia, India had no option but to buy oil from Russia. And in any case, the prices that we are buying, at which we are buying from Russia, is below the market cap that US and the Europeans have put. So really, they have no reason to criticize or complain against what India has been doing. But I think the basic approach from their side is that, okay, we don't agree with the position that India has taken, but we understand India's compulsion. So that's one. Another area where there will be disagreement will be on Pakistan. For example, on the India-Pakistan issues, US today's position is heavily weighted in favor of India, which is very different from where it was in the past. But at the same time, US feels the need to have some access to the leadership in Pakistan. It's a nuclear weapons country. And also for counterterrorism activity, including in Afghanistan. They want to fly drones over Afghanistan. And US drones have to fly over Pakistani territory to reach Afghanistan. So they want some access. And as a result, recently they authorized a $450 million sustainment package for the F-16s with Pakistan. Now, that's something that India will not like, because Pakistan uses F-16s only against India, although they claim it is for counterterrorism purposes. So there will be areas where there will be differences. But I think if we look at the overall relationship, the direction, the consolidation, certainly it is to mutual advantage, including to India's advantage.
Well, it certainly looks like that. But let me ask you this, sir. The United States often raises some rather prickly issues, such as press freedom in India, religious freedom in India, India's human rights record. Some in the US have termed it democratic backsliding in India. Is that likely to come up in these bilateral talks? And if yes, how is India likely to deal with it?
So I don't think it will be taken up in a major way. So, the way the US has defined its role internationally, it has defined, since the end of the Second World War, it has defined its role internationally as doing advocacy for democracy, doing advocacy for human rights. And there are some in the US who have negative perceptions related to developments in India. But at the same time, the US itself has challenges. You look at the problem of racism in the United States, or look at the kind of action that had taken place under President Trump, when the US Congress was stormed, when the finalization of the transfer of power was taking place. So all democracies face challenges, and they have to handle it, whatever challenges themselves. So I think the way the US or the US government will square this issue would be perhaps to make some general reference to the need for strengthening democracies everywhere without getting into any kind of a strident assessment of their own making related to developments that they believe may be happening.
All right. So I now want to shift our focus to a slightly different issue. A touch of personal warmth is being extended to Prime Minister Modi during this visit. President Biden and the First Lady will also host the Prime Minister at a private event at the White House, in addition to the state dinner. As we mentioned earlier, President Biden is likely to accompany the Prime Minister to a tech event. Over the years, we've seen a growing personal rapport between the two leaders, including some warm hugs. What do you make of the bonhomie between the two leaders? And in the world of diplomacy, what does it really mean? Beyond optics.
So, if you look at the evolution of the India-US relationship since 2000, and as I mentioned to you right in the beginning, presidents and prime ministers have played personal role in advancing the relationship. President Bush, even before he had started his campaign, told the team that he was building around him that he wanted a strategy to build a relationship with India. When Prime Minister Manmohan Singh met President Bush in 2008, towards the end of President Bush's tenure, he said to him that the people of India deeply love you. And at a time when he was very
and if I may add, many viewed that statement here in India with utter disbelief. But please go ahead.
Well, because he had done the Civil Nuclear Cooperation Agreement. And the Indian Prime Minister went on to say that when history is written, it will be recorded that President Bush played a very important personal role in advancing the relationship. Because when negotiations stalled, he had stepped in. Similarly, President Obama, at several stages, for example, when he declared support for India's permanent membership of UN Security Council, his advisors were divided. Some said you should go ahead, some opposed it, and finally it was his call. So, and on the Indian side, Prime Minister Vajpayee said that India and US are natural allies. And Prime Minister Manmohan Singh staked the survival of his government when there was a no confidence motion in the Indian Parliament for the nuclear agreement that he was doing. So, presidents and prime ministers over the last 20 years have each of them played a role in advancing the relationship. And I think it's the same also with Prime Minister Modi. Many steps have been taken when he has been Prime Minister, which has advanced the relationship in different ways. And then I think the kind of personal relationship that he was able to establish, first with President Obama, then with President Trump, now with President Biden, makes the level of discourse far more comfortable. And they're able to deal with issues even where they may not agree in a friendly way, to understand each other's compulsions and show a certain level of empathy. So that certainly makes a difference.
Interesting. You believe that personal chemistry between world leaders does make a big difference. It's not just about optics. Let me ask you this now. In recent years, under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi, many say India has come into its own on the global stage, repeatedly asserting its independent foreign policy like a self-assured nation, even in the face of criticism, as we mentioned earlier, and it has grown in international stature. For example, Prime Minister Modi's words of advice to the Russian President Vladimir Putin that this is not an era of war in the context of the Russia-Ukraine conflict resonated globally, and these words were echoed by many world leaders. What do you think this particular state visit by Prime Minister Modi to the US mean for India's global stature?
So, Neha, if you see, the world is changing dramatically. When India became independent, we were faced with a bipolar world, and that lasted till about 1990. After 1990, till about 2010 or so, we were faced with a unipolar world situation, essentially dominated by the US. Today, we are faced with a multipolar world situation where US leadership is being contested primarily by Russia and China. Now, given that, and given our own interests and challenges, it is important for India to consolidate the relationship further with the US, to sustain the relationship with Russia, and strengthen itself to deal with the challenges that it has with China. So given that, I think the visit of the Indian Prime Minister to the US and the kind of welcome that is being prepared in the US, including in the government, including in terms of substantive cooperation, and the imagination, is really catching the imagination of the wider groups of people, both in India and the US, will serve to deepen the relationship between India and the US, not just at the level of government, but in business, in the academic community and wider society. So it will certainly be very, very significant.
Okay, so my question is, this is my final question to you, sir. Do you believe that during this visit, President Biden and Prime Minister Modi will also be somewhat playing to their domestic audience in view of the fact that both these leaders face an election in their respective countries next year? Or do you believe that is really not much of a factor?
Well, I don't think the domestic is immediately the very important factor, but certainly it plays well. And if in India it is perceived that the Prime Minister Modi has certain stature at the global stage, the kind of reception he gets in the US, it adds to the positive assessments that people would have of him in India. Similarly, as far as President Biden is concerned, the fact that he's able to consolidate relationship with different countries, the fact that he's taking steps to deal with the challenges that the US has, including with China, and then it will also resonate with the Indian American community in the US. Now, this has become a significant community, more than 4 million strong. It's the largest single country present of Indian origin diaspora. And in many states, the size of the Indian American community today is larger than the size by which the president had won the election in 2020. So in those states. So it's a significant presence of the Indian American community. They're active in the elections. They're active in funding for campaigns. So I think for President Biden also, it would be helpful. After all, if President Trump came to the rally with the Prime Minister in Houston, he came not just because of India.
And
or
who
Indian
can forget Ab Ki Baar Trump Sarkar?
Trump Sarkar. Also, he was looking at his own voting base, at funding and votes for his own elections. So that's certainly also a fact.
It is a factor. Well, one thing we know for sure is that all eyes will be on this historic visit this week. Ambassador Arun Singh, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, sir. Thank you so much for your time and perspective on this critical issue, and we hope to have you back on the show very soon.
Thank you, Neha.